think about the geography of the West Coast. We have a lot of mountains that are just set in from the ocean. Like on the west part of the continent, we have a lot of tall mountains. We have the Rockies, the Sierra Nevadas, the Cascades. These mountains actually affect the weather. Latitude and heat carried by winds and ocean currents influence the regional climate. Think about these three states: Oregon, Montana, and Vermont. They're they're at the same latitude pretty much. You can go, if you go west to east, then you would pass through all of these states: Oregon, then Montana, then Vermont. But they're affected by the prevailing winds that blow from west to east differently. So they have very different climates and very different communities. I'm not talking about human communities here necessarily. I'm talking about the the wildlife that naturally occurs there. They have different communities in Vermont than they do in Oregon or Montana. This is because an area's location with respect to oceans, winds, and mountains is important. If you look at this diagram, you can see the effect of coastal mountains on regional climates. This is an example of what we see near Oregon at the Cascade Mountains. As moist ocean air rises over the upwind side of the coastal mountains, you can see that it condenses, which means it forms clouds. That moisture in the air condenses into clouds. The air cools, and so you have cool air with a lot of clouds, so you get a lot of precipitation. You get a lot of rain and snow on the west side of these mountains. As the air passes over the mountains, then it starts sinking. As it sinks on the downwind side of the mountain, it expands, it warms, it gets warmer, and it absorbs the moisture. So we end up with a very dry climate on the east side of these mountains. Here we see these labels. As the air rises and cools, it releases moisture, and then as it descends, it warms and it becomes drier. So eastern Oregon and eastern Washington are quite dry and warm compared to western Oregon and Washington, where they're very wet and they're cooled by those winds coming in off of the ocean. Oregon borders the northern Pacific Ocean, where cold surface currents cool and humidify the winds blowing over them from west to east. That means that there are cold surface currents that absorb that moisture. That moist air hits the Cascade Mountains, it's pushed upwards, and it cools, causing the moisture that it carries to condense and form these clouds. The clouds drop rain or snow mainly on the side of the mountain that faces the winds, as we see in the diagram. The resulting climate is cool, not super cold, not bitterly cold, but it's cool, and it's very wet. There's a lot of rain, and there's snow up in the mountains. On the east side of the Cascades, the air is drier and much warmer in summer. So different plant and animal communities live in eastern Washington and Montana. Montana is east of Oregon. Think about pictures that you've seen of Montana. It's very different than what you see of like Portland, which is in western Oregon. Vermont, way off on the east coast, has a very different climate from eastern Washington and from Montana, because those winds have traveled over the entire continent, and they're no longer carrying that moisture from the Pacific Ocean. So Vermont's climate is affected by different forces than these states in the West.